this video is going to provide you with some easy, hands-on examples of things that you can use either for a propagation or for a botany class. So this is kind of the lab, and we're going to be focusing on houseplants because many of them are easy to get a hold of and they can be used in the winter even when we can't go outdoors. So we're going to be focusing on asexual propagation, which is essentially clonal propagation, right? So we have a daughter plant that is the exact copy of the parent plant. And there are several different examples. If we think about division, that would be maybe one of the first ones, and many gardeners are going to be familiar with it when they think about their daylilies and many perennial plants that are in their garden. Division can also be accomplished with many houseplants. Snake plant is an example of one that you could use for division. If you look at some of the old houseplant books, what they'll say is don't divide your sansevieria until it's cracking the pot, right? So we're getting close here. Root-bound plants, and we are simply be separating these, right? So there would be 4 or 3 different divisions here, and we have roots, we have leaves, we have an entire plant propagule that we're essentially transplanting. It's simple, it's straightforward, it could be a good place to begin. But leaf and stem cuttings may be the most fun and maybe ways to kind of integrate some of the concepts and some of the terms that we've used in botany. And so leaf cuttings may seem to people to be the simplest place to begin. However, what's interesting about leaf cuttings is that when you think about a leaf, right, to create a whole plant, then that means that plant must have in those leaf cells the ability to reproduce stems and roots. And there are not that many plants that have that ability. Some that do are begonias, and lots of times we might use Rex begonias, we might use different kinds of tuberous begonias. African violets are another example. We are actually going to use, for an example here, begonias, right? So what we really want when we do a leaf cutting of a begonia is we want this main vein in contact with media. And so what we want to create are adventitious roots and, very uniquely from these begonias leaves, adventitious shoots. And so the meristematic tissue around the vascular system in this leaf actually has the ability to regenerate both adventitious roots and adventitious shoots. And one of the things that helps support, kind of initiate that activity is some of this wounding. And so that'll be common for a lot of the cuttings that we're doing. Well, it's no surprise that I'm a plant physiologist, and so I'll always kind of focus on some of the plant growth and anatomy types of things, but we also don't want to overlook when we're talking about botany, when we're talking about propagation and doing some of these examples, to think about the plant pathology aspects. So clean surfaces, clean hands, opportunities to discuss how we clean our tools with alcohol solutions, how we're going to sterilize our plant material before it goes into any sort of healing or rooting type environment. All right, here we have our sanitation tools of the trade. So we have a clean work surface, we have clean hands, we have our plant material, and we have our tools. So when it comes to our tools, we're going to take good care of those. I have a alcohol solution here that I'm going to clean between all of my cuttings. That's a good thing to just go ahead and train people on. And then when we think about the plant material themselves, we have clean instruments. We also want to make sure that we surface sterilize these plant material before we put them in the rooting area. So this is like a 5% dilute bleach solution. There are, of course, lots of commercial materials that you can use, but this bleach solution is a good place to begin. We can either air dry or towel dry those. All of our tip or stem cuttings, all of these are good if we can remove as many surface contaminants as possible. So while those are drying, it's also a time that you could consider having some kind of a rooting hormone if you wanted to bring in the discussion about plant hormones. This is an IBA, so it's synthetic auxin. So there are lots of additional types of facets that you can bring in to this discussion. So when these cuttings are dry and ready to go, if you want to dip them in a rooting hormone, then you would do that. Once again, we want to make sure that rooting hormone is in its own separate container. We're not contaminating the entire jar. Once again, making sure to manage these in a sanitary way. Careful cutting and good sanitation, and now we want this piece of plant material to have contact with good rooting media. And so what I'm using is a greenhouse mix. Here we want as clean as possible, right? So essentially pathogen free. We want something that holds moisture well, but also doesn't promote rotting of this plant material. So we want it to be well drained, but also hold water well. And so what we want is good contact. You could even use staples or something to kind of hold this down. For some of these larger leaves, sometimes what people will do is actually sector them, right? One single leaf can take up a whole lot of room. And so there are other examples that you can kind of score and wound some of these main veins, but you want to make sure that you have good contact with the media. And then these could, they could go in a mist chamber, right? Someplace where we have good access to high humidity, or you could even put a little piece of saran wrap over this to try to maintain high humidity. What we want is for these leaves not to dry out, right? We want them to have good contact with moist media, but we also don't want them to rot. So it's kind of a combination. This is an example of what these begonias will hopefully look like over a period of time, right? So this was the initial leaf right here. And then we have, of course, adventitious shoots that were formed. We have new stems here and, of course, an adventitious root system. What are some other opportunities that we could use for leaf cuttings? Some of the succulents. So this is a jade plant. So jade is an example where under proper conditions, we could have a leaf cutting that would also produce an entire plant. Snake plants are another example, right? So this is one that has actually been rooting for a while. And we have, what we can see here are adventitious roots that were from this leaf cutting, right? So this was just a cutting taken out of a sansevieria plant. We want to make sure that we root the bottom in, right? So we put it in the media, in the right direction, and then we will have both adventitious roots and adventitious shoots. So this is a couple of months in, but you can see what can be accomplished, and many cuttings can be taken off of a single snake plant. So those are some examples of leaf cuttings that can be done. When we talk about leaf cuttings, there's also leaf petiole cuttings or tip cuttings, which really kind of get into the category of stem cuttings. And so we're going to primarily be talking about herbaceous stem cuttings. And most of the time what we want to do is take that cutting right below a node, right? So, so this is of course a good example, hands-on demonstrations where we talk about nodes where the leaves join and internodes between those. You can even talk about internode distance, right? So there's really good ways to kind of make some of those concepts connect home. These are some plants that were actually started from tip cuttings. So this is a Photonia or a nerve plant. You can see adventitious roots from this stem cutting. These of course are growing in media right now, but you can also root a lot of these tip cuttings in water, which is a fun way to see those roots begin to grow. And in a few days or weeks, these can be a pretty quick turnaround. Other examples where tip cuttings are really easy to take might be something like a plant that has aerial roots. So this is a golden pothos. Philodendron, Hartley philodendron is another example. And what we would do is simply take this cutting right here. We can see a couple of locations where we have these aerial roots. We could put this in media, or we could even root this in water, and it will just take a few days before we'll start seeing growth on some of these aerial roots. And in just a few weeks, we could essentially have a new golden pothos plant. So those are some really simple tip cuttings. And then we have a few examples here of things that we can do stem cuttings, right? So a couple common houseplants that you can use might be Chinese evergreen or Dieffenbachia. One thing that I want to say about both of these is they're their sap can be really an irritant and also poisonous. So you want to be careful when you're handling them. Use gloves. There are a couple of different ways that we can do stem cuttings, right? So one would be an example of rooted stem cutting. You can ignore these brown leaves here. This is actually a plant that came from a greenhouse, so it has been getting too much sunlight. So we could take a main growing point right here and essentially just root this end, right? So if you have a tall, leggy plant, this can be a way to reduce the size and make it more compact and fit into your space. In fact, that's exactly what has been done with this Dieffenbachia right here. So this was just a rooted tip cutting. Another way that you can teach stem cuttings, which really connects well with the topic of auxiliary buds on stems, can be by actually doing some stem cuttings. And so once again, we want to be careful that we don't get any of this irritant on us. But every time we have a leaf that has died here, so these are leaf nodes, we actually can see some of these auxiliary shoots, right? So this is a really good example of an opportunity to kind of explain that we actually have the potential to get shoots right from this stem section. And so these are pretty simple to root stem sections like this. We'll just put it in that moist media. Here we can actually put it in with some of our other examples of cuttings. And what we will get over time is actually new shoots arising from those auxiliary growing points. So here you can see these new shoots arising. Here's a little bit larger one. So this is a couple months down the road, but these can be simple make and take. You can see here, this is an open flat, but you can also use really small pots, or I mean actually even clay pots you can get for $1 or something like that. So a lot of these plants can be pretty simple propagation activities. This cutting could have been put immediately in a container. So there are lots of ways that for not too much upfront cost and also a fairly simple and easy to demonstrate hands-on lesson, you can have both the opportunity to kind of integrate some of these concepts when we talk about roots, stems, and leaves, but also auxiliary shoots, adventitious roots, and also the opportunity to kind of talk about propagation and bring some of these concepts home while giving people something to take with them and something fun to watch grow over the course of the next few weeks or months, and even something that can be added to their permanent houseplant collection. So, in quick review, we've talked a little bit about some of the most common and simple to demonstrate methods of asexual propagation. We have division, we have leaf cuttings, we have tip cuttings, and we have some examples of different types of stem cuttings.